Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about performance reviews.
We've talked about these before, but they're always good to talk about, especially in different times of the year.
I was going over some performance reviews for one of my clients, kind of reading over the way that they were written before they were administered to people, because there are several new leaders on one of the teams that I'm working with right now. And I started to notice some things on these performance reviews that were a little problematic. And I want to go over this because I think it might be something that is a pitfall of many new leaders and maybe even some seasoned leaders. I remember back when I was younger, I received a performance review that I didn't have any problem with at the time because it was all positive. But I remember leaving the interaction not feeling like I knew how to move forward, not really caring as much because I was younger, and again, it was a positive review. But the some of the things that were said on the review by my boss was that I was likable, or that my teammates liked me, and those kind of things. And I thought, well, that's good. I like that they like me, but what do I do going forward? Like, what am I doing that got me that got that belief in the head of my boss that I can now make sure I continue doing? And it works the same way for a negative. If he had said to me, your teammates don't really like you that much, the first thing that I would say, and I hope in the moment I would have had the forethought to say, what did I do? What did I do? And again, I didn't think to say that because I was told that I was likable. But the outcome is the same. It's this, like, what do I do with this information? And if there's nothing I can do with it, it really doesn't belong on a performance review, because the performance reviews are about behaviors. And a lot of the things that I was seeing on these performance reviews would leave an employee with the same impression, either a positive or a negative feeling that left them not able to take anything from that and either stop doing something or continue doing something.
I think it's a great call, because I think that sometimes over the years, as you were talking through that, I was thinking about a lot of performance reviews that I've read and that also that I've written. And I think a lot of times there's this feeling of kind of a need or an expectation that as the leader, you have to fill it with language and observations that in most cases either like solidify why you may be rating somebody this way, or why why they're getting, this type of an increase, or just validating what it is that you're giving to them from a either scoring standpoint or from a compensation standpoint. And I think, to your point, many times we fall into this trap of talking about, people's just kind of personalities as we see them, or utilizing definitions or utilizing words that are about the person and not necessarily about like the behavior towards the performance. And I think that's, and like, look, I think everybody's been guilty of it.
Sure.
I'm sure if you pulled, my performance reviews over the years, I would think that I've gotten better. I would say that I know that I have.
Oh, ones you've written, you mean? Your performance
the ones that I've written. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. And that's it. The reason why I think I've gotten better is that mostly is because I've reduced the amount that I write, and I really do my best to stay on task with what are the actual behaviors that this leader is doing that I know directly ties into the work that they're being asked to go do. And I think that if I was to flip through the years, it would be a lot more language around things that I've observed that are really about the person's personality. Hey, always appreciate your positive attitude and, the way that you engage with people. But none of those things, I think, in that aspect are tied directly to a business outcome. And even if they were, I think there's a better way to do it and a different way to say it.
Right. So I don't want to minimize the impact of a person's personality on business outcomes unless you work solo. Like if you're a single outside salesperson and there's no collaboration needed. You don't have really any teammates. It's just kind of you, maybe. But most jobs require some collaboration and require some teamwork and require interpersonal relationships that you have to maintain in order to have a better business outcome or a better measurable performance. That's an aspect of it. And so a person's personality will lead them to have higher or lower performance when it comes to certain aspects of what their job expectations are. So that it doesn't mean that these things don't count. It just means that you can't work backwards from what you already think. So give an example. If Lorenzo and I both reported to the same person, and that person liked me but didn't like Lorenzo, they could say, I really like Chris's passion. He's steadfast in his beliefs. And then they write Lorenzo's performance review and they say, Lorenzo really needs to work on his collaborative abilities. When he gets his mindset on something, he's just too stubborn to change it. And that person has essentially said the exact same thing about both people, one framed positively and one framed negatively. And it's like that they started with what they already felt, kind of not objectively observed, but just kind of had a feeling about how they felt about me versus how they felt about Lorenzo. And now they're trying to back that up with things that are maybe less quantifiable, but that can't be challenged. Like how do you challenge something like that when someone says it? Because they're not telling you that you've done something right. Oh, on this day at this time you worked with these people and did this thing right, or on this day at this time you worked with these people and did something wrong. And if you're not saying those things and you can't back it up with the observable behaviors, then it's the wrong place to have it. The personality trait might be a piece of supporting evidence to something that they are doing from a behavioral standpoint, and you can tie them together. But if there's no behavior that you can specifically tie it to, then those other words don't belong anywhere near a performance review.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say that subjectively in my mind, I think, Chris is very collaborative and he's a great team player, right? Okay. So what does that actually mean, and what does that have to do with his performance?
Well, it means nothing if you just say that by itself.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I say, okay, for the second quarter, Chris intentionally engaged his team in a proactive way that led to a strategy that was both developed by the team and implemented by the team. This strategy led to the project being completed ahead of schedule and under budget. Chris had a consistent connection with his team throughout the project that included recognition recognition and specifics on the behaviors that were necessary to complete the project, and also pivoted when the project was getting behind schedule. Mm-hmm. Right. So again, if you read through the lines there, you would say, okay, great team player and he's collaborative. But what I would write is the specific things that you did and then the impact they had on the outcome of the project, without it being about you as a person and more about the behaviors that I was able to observe that led to the success of the project.
I like that a lot, because it is, first of all, anybody reading it would have a far more comprehensive view on what kind of an employee this person was than if they just read Chris is collaborative and a good team player. That is, I'm not saying those are bad things. Those are great things, but that's what you say to somebody in passing as you're, walking from the Starbucks. That's not what belongs on a performance review. Because again, if the purpose of a performance review is a formalized record of what a person did, when it's done this way with personality traits as opposed to behaviors, not only are you being unfair to an employee when it's on a negative stance, but you're also shortchanging them when it comes to the positive. Because no one who reads that performance review 2 years later, when when Chris is trying to apply for a position within the organization, and someone wants to go back and look at the last 3 or 4 performance reviews that Chris had, just being able to see, hey, Chris is collaborative and a team player, they're not going to know anything about what that means. The person who wrote the performance review isn't going to remember why they wrote that 3 years later. But if they wrote the things that you said about the project and the outcomes and what happened, someone who read that, who wrote it 3 years earlier, would read that and go, oh, I remember that. I remember, yeah, that was with this and this and this project and these people. And it's so much more, it honors the work done more. And it doesn't leave an employee feeling like their performance review was written from a standpoint of just how their boss felt about them, but rather on what they actually did for the year. And that is that's a very good thing, especially if you have employees who are not doing well. If you're a leader of people, you will have employees that are not doing well, and you will have to write performance reviews that back that information up. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than an employee who challenges you on a performance review that you've written because they're a thorn in your side already, and they're not they don't have great business outcomes, but you haven't done your due diligence as a leader to make note and a record of all of the behaviors that were done. So instead, you start using personality traits to talk about why the performance was low, and they start challenging you on that. If you have nothing to back it up, then you're going to have some egg on your face there. That's not a good position to be in when it comes to those negative interactions. You need to have your ducks in a row, and the professionalism of saying that, I'm taking my job as a leader seriously, and I need to hold you accountable to these things, but I've done my due diligence, and I have the records, and I have the interactions, and I've spoken to people, and I have specific examples and times and places, and that's what is needed in order to have a good performance review, both on the positive and the negative. And as a leader, if you don't have those things, it probably means that you are starting from a feeling or what you want to give this person, either positively or negatively, and then working backwards from that to fill in things that you think will support the outcome that you've already come to. When instead you should be starting from a behavioral standpoint. You tell the story of the behaviors, then you can look back and read everything that you wrote and go, okay, this is clearly what this person deserves now, because everything I've written down for the year, that is backing up what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. If you're in the middle of writing performance reviews, or if you're about to write them, the way to do this is to write them. To write them out like you normally would, because at the end of the day, they have to be written first. And then what I want you to do is I want you to find a coworker who is not personally tied to any of the people that you're writing reviews for. And I want you to change the names of the people in the performance review, and I want you to read a performance review to somebody else. And the goal is you want to ask this person, after you read the performance review to them, if you were receiving this performance review, would you be very clear on what things you did throughout the year to get you the either positive or negative results that you're getting on your performance review? Do you know what behaviors you did that you should keep doing? Do you know what behaviors you did that you should stop doing? Do you know what behaviors need to be done that you should start doing that you haven't done yet? These are very important questions for every employee to be able to answer to themselves when they leave a performance review. So if your performance review does not answer those questions, it's not an effective performance review. When you're going back and rewriting those performance reviews after you've done this exercise to make sure that it does answer those questions, ask yourself a question every line that you write when it comes to talking about the person. Is the line talking about who they are as a person, or is the line talking about the business outcome and observable behaviors they did throughout the year that then could lead a person to interpret who they are as a person one way or another, but you're not actually starting with that personality trait. If you're starting with the personality trait, that doesn't belong in the performance review. If you're starting with the business outcome and the observable behaviors that got to that business outcome, and then there's something supportive in there about how they're a good person, that's fine. but they need to be able to answer those core questions first. What did I do specifically, and how do I replicate it?
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and I think when you take off their names and read it to somebody, make sure that person doesn't know them.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Because that's a big part of this. Is it's kind of like you're really trying to ask for direct feedback on just the language that's being used, and it makes it much easier if the person has no idea who you're talking about. But I love the idea of kind of doing what you're going to do, stop and pause, reflect, take a look at it, and then rewrite with a different lens. And I think the same thing is kind of like if you go back, and I think this is also good practice, go back and read one of your old performance reviews that you got from a boss, take a look at it, and then rewrite your own and how you would have preferred it to be written if it was based about your behaviors tied to the outcome.
I love it.
Like maybe start there, and that would, I think, be a lot more helpful because this is you. It's personal. You'll have a lot more of a keen eye to look at it, and you'll know the things that you did that impacted the actual outcome. But maybe start there as a means of kind of getting the ball rolling. But I think this is something that over time, I know that I personally have learned to refine and sharpen. And I'm not still great at it, probably. If I look back at it, even recently, I'll probably be like, oh, yep, totally flubbed that one. So it's one of those things that we all have to practice and get good at.
Right. And again, it's not just that, like in a truly egregious example, a person could have it be all about personality and not about behaviors or examples or anything like that. The vast majority of leaders don't fall into that category, just like there are very few leaders that would write a performance review perfectly that is void of personality types and more and completely about observable behaviors and business outcomes. Most leaders, even great leaders, fall somewhere in the middle ground of they do cite examples, but there's also some personality traits in there too. And the goal, again, is to make sure that nothing that you put in there could be attributed to the subjective nature of how you feel about the individual in general, because you clearly feel differently about your employees. There are some employees on your team who you absolutely adore. You have employees on your team who you can't stand and wish they were gone. And you have a lot of people in the middle who you don't have either those really strong positive or negative feelings for to begin with. And those feelings absolutely, even to the best of people, they impact the way you write performance reviews. And they shouldn't. It's not fair to the employee, whether it's positive or negative, and it's not good leadership practice in general. And so the more you can get out of that mindset of thinking positively or negatively about a person and then letting that write the review, the better off you'll be, and the more defendable your performance reviews will be if they're challenged in the future. Because I know, I'll tell you, the instances and the rates of employees receiving negative performance reviews and not just walking away going, okay, even if they disagree with it, is lessening. The rate of employees who receive a negative performance review that they disagree with and immediately challenging it and wanting to know more information and maybe even going above their leader to somebody else to talk to them about why they got a negative performance review, that is on the rise. And so the more tight and defendable and evidence-based your performance reviews are, the better off you're going to be as a leader and the more effective you will be with people on your team.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.